blasphemy. So, in the words of C.S. Lewis, you're left with three propositions. Either Jesus is who he claims to be and has demonstrated that he is divine and therefore is the Lord, or, as the Christian apologist C.S. Lewis said, he's a lunatic because he thinks he's God. And someone asked Professor Lewis what he meant by a lunatic. He said, well, along the lines of someone walking up to you on the street and introducing themselves to you as a poached egg. That kind of a lunatic. Hello, I'm a poached egg. Well, because he believes himself to be divine. But you know he's not. Or he's a liar, right? Because he knows he's not God. But he's lying to you, presenting himself as God without the proofs necessary. So we have to make that decision, right? And I made that decision. I remember clearly, Lord, lunatic, or liar, right? And I considered all the possibilities and landed on Lord. And then God starts opening our minds, our understanding, our insight. So there's always so much more to glean. And that's why I love coming up here once a year. I'll be back next year. I think it's like 13 years. I've been doing this a long time. It's great. And by the way, you know Pastor Aaron. He's coming up in August. He's now my neighbor. He moved into my neighborhood, and we're laughing because he said, well, look, let's do a Bible study for the neighborhood. And we'll do it on Thursday night. I said, Aaron, the problem is, between you and me, it would just be a monologue one week and a monologue the next week. He goes, yeah, you're probably right about that. But anyway, he's looking forward to greeting you in the coming weeks. So having said all of that, that's all the teacher has for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless you, and have a great Sunday. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is a delight to greet you. As I was driving up, I wondered, would we be in here or out there? This is my second year in a row here inside. Last year it was pouring rain as well. A couple of years before, though, we were outside. For those of you that don't know me, I am an anomaly. In that I have made my living for the last 22 years as a full-time Catholic Christian Bible teacher. And you don't know a lot of those because there aren't many. I'm not an ordained minister. I'm a layperson. So that's why I'm married and have 6 grandchildren with 1 more on the way, which is good news to report. And I've been working for the past 22 years down in the valley. And I had, up until May, 9 different venues in which I would teach reading and commenting book by book through the entire Bible. It's a 7-year journey. And I've graduated over 1,200 people through that course that I call the Bible Plain and Simple. Now, when you look at life, you know there is one thing that's constant, and that's change. And everything that I've done for the past 22 years kind of came to a gentle conclusion just this past spring. Because of the effects of COVID and challenges to my student body population, which tends to skew toward the senior side of the equation, my numbers never returned to pre-COVID levels, and so it became more and more difficult without the blessing of some very generous donations to continue the ministry. So I had to change a bit, and what I've done is established a new bulwark in my life. I'm going to be a full-time religion teacher at Notre Dame Catholic Prep High School. So I found a Notre Dame to teach at. And yeah, it's good news because they have a sophomore year program, and every sophomore in the school has to follow this course of study through the Bible. And so I'm the new Bible man on campus, and in addition, I'll be opening one more beginning to end Bible class, going back to the beginning where I first began to teach 22 years ago. That particular church, St. Timothy's in Mesa, is going to host me yet again. So Tuesday night is going to be Bible night again, and I'm going to make one more epic journey through the text with my regular clientele. So I know that I'll be back next year because I haven't lost my credential or my ability to bring, I hope, the Word of God alive. It's wonderful to have this opportunity with you. And I thank you for remembering that I did end that passage right at verse 51, obviously for a reason. Let's talk for a minute about the gospel, right? The gospel of Mark, the gospel of Matthew, the gospel of Luke, the gospel of John. These ancient texts are biographical. We learn about Jesus, about his life and his living situation through careful study of that aspect of our interest. But in addition to being biographical and historical, they're also theological, right? What's theology? Well, theology, a simple definition, is thinking about God, right? You think about zoology and biology, thinking about the animal kingdom, thinking about the biosphere, that sort of thing. So theology means we're going to think about God. And the Gospels are theological, right? As well as historical and life-transforming as well. Now, this particular little passage is fascinating because of the theology that's going to be revealed, right? We're going to read it, and we're going to ponder it and wonder what's going on, and then try to come up with some answers, right? And the answers are going to be rooted in the Jewishness of Jesus, right? Remember that the first apostles and all the followers of Jesus were Jewish. And so there are clues in the Gospels that you need to decipher from a Jewish point of reference. Now, as mentioned, I lived and was blessed to be the chaplain for the Christian students that attended the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And one of the great benefits of having that position on the Mount Scopus campus was the engagement I was allowed to have with rabbis who taught in the graduate school that I also attended. And they would always refer to Jesus very reverentially as your Lord, I'm a Christian, and our teacher. Because in their mind view, Jesus was the greatest rabbi of his age, right? One of the things about Judaism which often strikes people in a way they never imagined is that in Judaism, there is no universal expectation for a singular figure that we have acknowledged Jesus to be, that is, the Messiah. So if you're talking to a Jewish rabbi today, and you ask that rabbi, are you expecting the Messiah? They will more often than not say, he's here. And you'd say, well, now that's interesting. Where can I find him? Well, there's a Messiah, you see, for every age. I was just in Israel 2 months ago, and we arrived a week after the Messiah of this age had passed. And he was an Orthodox rabbi of such great renown that he was acclaimed to be the Messiah of this age. And do you know how many people attended his funeral? 300,000 people attended his funeral. Now we know he's not the Messiah. We know Jesus is the Messiah. And the Gospels are written to prove that. So if we just remind ourselves of how the Gospel of Mark opens, you'll see what I mean. This is the beginning of the good news, that's a translation of the word gospel, of Jesus Christ. Remember, that's not his last name, right? It's his title, Christos, Mashiach, the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of God. There it is, laid out for you in the very first verse. And you hear that proclaimed, or you read it, and then you say to yourself, prove it to me. And Mark says, I'm on it. I want to prove it to you. I'm going to use the first 8 chapters of what we know to be the 16 chapters of the Gospel of Mark to prove to you that this Jesus, whom we know as the Messiah and have come to believe is also the Son of God, showed us this time and time and time again. But you and I would read the Gospel and say, I don't see that. I've often, wondered, why not just invent an airplane and have it fly through the sky, and have the sky written, I'm the Messiah, there's not going to be another one, get over it. And the whole world would see that and say, all right, we're believers. Well, that would be too easy. We need to engage the narrative. We need to walk with Jesus, and we need to come up with our own decision. You see, that's the whole point of the gospel, right? To get you to a point, it actually happens in chapter 8, where you have to make that decision for yourself. Here it is. There's the evidence. Weigh it in the balance, and you decide, right? You know, I always laugh about my life's work, which is teaching through the whole Bible. I've got no escape clause at the pearly gates. You know, I could never say, no. That was in the Bible. You see, because this is what I've spent my life teaching, right? And again, by the time you get to the 8th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, you know too much. So if you're afraid of making a decision, don't read, because you have to come to a conclusion. How did Jesus reveal himself to be divine? Well, here's an example that's not even in the gospel that we're going to be studying in just a moment. But it also happens on the Sea of Galilee. Now, what do I know, and some of you know about the Sea of Galilee that many people don't? First of all, it sits 800 feet below sea level, which means you have the Mediterranean here, and you have the Sea of Galilee here, and then you have the Golan Heights here. Winds prevailing on a daily basis, cool, drawn from the Mediterranean, sweep down in the afternoon and blow from west to east across that 7-mile expanse of the Sea of Galilee. And they blow consistently all night long and then dissipate at about 3 or 4 in the morning. Now, if you're going to fish the waters of the Sea of Galilee, you have your fishing village on the western shore, because you fish the Sea of Galilee at night, right? And the winds will fill your sails, and you sail peacefully and quietly to where you fish on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, near the village called Bethsaida, right? And you count on those winds. In fact, again, just 2 months ago, I was in Galilee. We spent 4 nights on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and every afternoon, after touring all day long, I'd take the group of 44 people and I'd stand them on the shoreline and say, do you feel the breeze? There it was. It wasn't there all day, but there it was, and it blows gently all night long. Sometimes contrary winds in the Middle Eastern world called Sharako or Hamsin. They blow from the east to the west. And when they're coming off the hot deserts of the east, and they meet the gentle breezes that are coming from the west in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, suddenly there's terror, right? Because waves and whitecaps appear instantaneously, right? And you don't want to be on the Sea of Galilee when that happens. Now, I've been on the Sea of Galilee when that happens, but I was in a diesel-generated tour boat. So we just motored right through. But if you were a little vessel that can barely hold 12 men with a single sail, you're in trouble. Now look what happens in this story. Evening had come, and he said to them, I'm reading now from Mark chapter 4, verse 35. I am going to get to Mark chapter 6, so you'll see it all fits together. Leaving the crowd behind, they took with them in the boat, just as he was, Jesus. Other boats were with him. Now a great windstorm arose, which means this is an indication that winds are coming from the east. They're going to meet the winds that are coming from the west in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. They're heading to the other side to fish, so they're going to be caught in this storm. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat against the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he, meaning Jesus, was in the stern. I love this. Asleep on a cushion. You know, I have a boat, and I've got cushions in my boat, and sometimes you can sleep on those cushions. These boats don't have cushions. Well, why would a fishing boat have cushions? So you have to figure out what's going on. They have ballast bags, right, which are filled with some sort of a substance that will counterbalance the ship, so that when you're hauling in a net, 4 men on this side, the ballast will balance it so it doesn't capsize, right? And you put those in the back of the boat when you're sailing, right? And there's some comfort to be found there, and Jesus is resting on those ballast bags. Now, he was in the stern, asleep on those ballast bags, and they, commercial fishermen, woke him and said to him, "Rabbi, do you not care that we are perishing?" It's over. We're all going to die. The deep, this part of the lake is where this event takes place. It's 400 feet deep at that point. 400 feet deep. You're not swimming to the shore. And he woke up, now watch, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And watch this now. And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Well, who is the one to whom the wind and the sea obey? God, right? And again, what we learn in the narrative, because these men were present, Mark is remembering Peter's experience with Jesus, is that he wasn't roused from his sleep so that he would say, "God help me, God help us." He didn't appeal to anyone else. He simply said, "Be still, be calm." And there was stillness, and there was calm, instantaneous. They're thinking to themselves, theologically, only God can accomplish what we've just experienced. And Jesus is looking at them, "Well, what do you think?" You see, this is the way he's revealing his divinity, and he does it on the Sea of Galilee. Why is that important? These are commercial fishermen. I can argue, and I think convincingly, that 7 of the 12 apostles, not Matthew, obviously not Simon the Zealot, but fully 7 of the 12 apostles were commercial fishermen, right? They lived in boats, and they plied the waters of the Sea of Galilee, right? So wouldn't you use that venue to get your message across to 7 of the 12, right? And again, these commercial fishing men say, hey, we're going to die unless you do something. And probably are waking them up wondering, can you swim? Because that's going to be our only choice in a few minutes' time. So that's the prequel. Here's the main story. Back to our gospel for this Sunday. Jesus made his disciples, this is verse 45 of Mark chapter 6, get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side. Now it says to Bethsaida. That's a textual variant error. From Bethsaida. The little article to can also be replaced with from. It's an option that you have when you're translating from the original Greek into English. Because you're already in Bethsaida, you've already fed 5,000 people that afternoon, and if you're going to the other side, you're going to be going to Capharnaum, back to headquarters. And to do that, you wonder if you're going to be able to make it because you have to row against the wind. Remember, you can't sail against the wind for another 1,200 years. That technology just doesn't exist. Hadn't been invented, tacking against the wind. So you can sail with the wind, but if you're going to go to Capharnaum in a boat, you're going to have to row that boat against the wind. But these men are capable of that. So he said, go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. And after saying farewell to them, he went up on the mountain from a vantage point above so that he could pray. Now, always pause here and ask the question. The next thing Jesus does is walks on the water. Why would he take advantage of that divine capacity? I mean, that's what theology is all about. Asking the right question. Think of all the miracles Jesus does. And I love the Chosen series. I'm sure many of you have watched it over and over again, as I have. And all of the miracles are so compelling because they become so personal. You know, and that's the beauty, the mastery of that series. But this particular miracle of Jesus walking on the water is completely self-serving. It's completely self-serving, right? Because he's fully capable of getting into the boat with his disciples, but he doesn't want to do that. Or walking the 10 miles or so that it would take to get from where he is over the top of the Sea of Galilee to Capharnaum. But he doesn't choose that option. And we never know why, if all we had was Matthew and Mark and Luke. But John, in his gospel, tells us why. John tells us in John chapter 6 that after the feeding of the 5,000 and the commissioning then of his disciples to head back to the other side, something unique is revealed. In John chapter 6, verse 15, after feeding the 5,000, a miraculous manifestation of a new kind of manna from heaven, sort of mosaic, if you will, Jesus realized that if he didn't do something, that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king. And so he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. He was afraid that if he didn't dismiss his disciples, go up higher onto the mountain to be alone to pray, that the crowd would acclaim him the Messiah. And that wasn't part of the plan. And he knew that if he walked through those villages the next morning, as occasion would warrant, he would be acclaimed publicly as the Messiah. And it's not his timing. He wasn't going to allow that to happen. So he waits as long as he can for the disciples to make as much progress as possible across the Sea of Galilee, and then he begins his journey. Now you know, and I know, that prior to this miracle, he's multiplied bread and provided food to sustain 5,000, says, men. Well, a man, biblically, in Judaism, is defined as a male between the ages of 20 and 50, right? That's a man. That's the age. So there had to be younger men than those who were 20. There were certainly older men than those who were 20. And every female that was there has to be counted as well. So we're talking about the possibility of feeding 10,000 people, right? That's a bold, declarative act of God, and it's mosaic, right? It would remind you, if you're Jewish, of what it must have been like during the wilderness wanderings. When Moses prayed and manna suddenly appeared in the morning, and you collected it, and you prepared it, and you consumed it, and it sustained you for the whole of the day. And if you collected too much, it spoiled the next day. In the multiplication miracles, remember, at the end of each multiplication miracle, what does Jesus say? Collect what's left over. Why? So we don't have to go to Fry's and buy bread tomorrow? No, because I want you to see that tomorrow this bread will not spoil. What I've provided for you is actually greater than manna. I out Moses in what I've just done. And if you're Jewish, that's an aha moment, right? Because in Judaism, Moses is the man. Without Moses, there is no Judaism, because without Moses, there's no 10 Commandments, right? You need the Torah. Moses was God's man. Moses, without him, there is no faith tradition, which, by the way, has now been actively engaged on our planet for 3,500 years. I mean, we've been around as Christians in our church for 2,000. We're just getting started, right? Because the Jews aren't going anywhere, and they were there with Moses 1,500 years earlier. So whenever Jesus can out Moses, he takes advantage of the opportunity. Now, what do you remember about Moses and some of the miracles associated with his life? Well, we talked about manna's provision at his request. But didn't he stand at the shore of the Red Sea and raise his staff? And didn't those waters part so he could pass with the Israelites safely and dry shod across terra firma? Well, you know the answer is yes. So if you want to out Moses, what's a good way to do that? If you're Jewish, walk on the water. Hey, how about that? No parting for me. I'm walking on the water, and the water's chaotic, right? You'll see in a moment. The apostles are rowing against the wind. And when he appears, they think he's a ghost, because they haven't had any time to think about what they're seeing. We'll keep that in mind. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. When he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, which again would make it difficult to row from east to west. By the way, if you fish all night and you collect your fish in your boats, in the early morning hours just before sunrise, glassy calm. That's why when I travel to Israel, I encourage everyone to get up as early as possible to be at the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee at sunrise. Because there's a calm there that's unimaginable. And then it's easy to row a boat, right? Because you don't need the sail. But that isn't the case here. It's in the early morning hours. So when he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came toward them early in the morning, walking on the sea. Get a load of me, I'm out Mosesing Moses yet again, as I did yesterday with the manifestation of the provision of manna. And here's the verse. And he intended to pass them by. Now, you and I apply our minds to that verse, and you have to come up with a conclusion along the lines. Maybe it's foggy, he didn't time it out right, if I move to the left they won't see me, oh gosh, they got a sight of me and now I've got to deal with it. Right? That was my initial idea. You know, he intended to pass them by. Well, again, because I had access to rabbis, right, who know the Hebrew Bible the way I know the New Testament, I asked them about that verse. What is going on here? That can't mean that Jesus didn't plan his timing right. Oh my gosh, I thought these guys would make it farther than this. What am I going to do now? Rabbi Dr. David Flusser. Remember the fellow who said, Jesus is your Lord and my Rabbi? I said, Kevin, there's a biblical character who was so beloved by God that when he asked to see the face of God, God didn't shut him down. He said in Exodus chapter 33, and I'm paraphrasing, pump the brakes, Moses. Pump the brakes. You can't handle what you would see if I reveal myself to you, but this is what I will do for you and only you. I'm going to place you face inward in front of a cave. So you're looking deep into the darkness. And then, now watch, this is Exodus chapter 33, verse 19. I'm going to pass by you. And you can turn as quickly as you can, and what you will see is the trail of my glory. The trail of my glory. That's as good as I can give you. That's all you can handle. I thought, well, there is a clue, right? God passed by Moses to prove his divinity, his divine characteristic, right? And so when Mark, who's a Jewish believer, remembering the preaching of Peter, who's a Jewish believer, adds that little narrative detail that he intended to pass them by. He's saying the whole point of this experience was to reveal, once again, his divinity. Right? He did it on the Sea of Galilee before. Right? He did it with the manifestation of the multiplication of bread the day before. And now he's at it again, right? He's revealing to his disciples in a context that they understand because they're Jewish, that Moses spoke about me. I am not only the Messiah, but I'm, in addition, the Son of God. And it doesn't end there. There's still another amazing point of reference. Now, it says, when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out. For they all saw him, and they were terrified. Well, the word terrified in Greek can be translated in a number of ways. Equally powerful, they were in awe of what they saw. You can be in awe and be terrified at the same time. I mean, look, I wasn't there when Mount St. Helens blew, but I had friends who lived in Portland, and they were terrified and in awe at the same time, right? Terrified because if all that stuff lands on us, we're dead. But in awe of the power of Mother Nature, because a third of the mountain had disappeared, right? So the disciples are certainly terrified, but in a sense of an awareness that they're in the presence of something they don't understand. Now in the Matthew account of the same story, you know it. Doesn't Peter offer himself as a test to the divinity? If it's you, call me out. Let me walk toward you. And remember, Peter gets out of that boat and walks toward Jesus. But then, when he senses the wind and the waves turning because his garments are fluttering around him, he loses faith and he begins to sink. And he cries out, save me. Well, you cry out, save me to God, right? God, save me. And Jesus does. And he restores him to the boat. We don't have time to look at that passage, but I love this. When Peter is in the boat, Jesus says to him, oh, Peter, I'll use the old King James translation, ye of little faith. I'm thinking to myself, what does this guy demand of us? I got out of the boat. I was walking on the water. What do you mean? You of little faith. Come on, give me some credit. The other 11 didn't budge, right? They didn't follow me out of the boat. Again, Rabbi Dr. David Flusser to the rescue, right? And also Dr. Billy Graham, right? Because the kind of faith that Jesus is talking about is the cherry on the top of the sundae, right? Billy Graham often told the story of this understanding of biblical faith, right? You go to Niagara Falls and you see a poster. Hey, Marcel's going to ride his bicycle across a tightrope between the United States and Canada and back. That's like the beginning of faith. It's called knowledge. You know about it because you saw it on a placard. But you don't necessarily believe it until you buy a ticket and you go and you watch and you see it happen. Seeing is believing. Now you believe. So you have knowledge, and upon that knowledge you add belief. Then Dr. Graham said, the kind of faith that Jesus is talking about in regard to Peter, you of little faith, is the faith that would be required if Marcel rode up to you and said, well, you know I can do it. Do you believe I can do it because you saw I did it? How about you get on the handlebars and go with me next time? See, that would take that leap of faith, right? And that's what Jesus is asking of the disciples. Now, we don't have that aspect of the story. You know why? Because Mark is remembering the preaching of Peter. That's the source of his gospel. Mark writes his gospel 2 years before Peter dies. Peter's in Rome. He'll be martyred there. And he's commissioned Mark, get this all down. And every story in the Gospel of Matthew that honors Peter, blessed are you, Peter, son of John. No mere man has revealed this to you, but except my Father in heaven. Or he gets out of the boat and he walks, is omitted in the Gospel of Mark. He's remembering the preaching of Peter. And Peter remembers that he denied he knew the Lord, not once, twice, but 3 times. And he doesn't want to exalt himself. So he takes himself out of the story, right? So that the gospel message can become the focal point. And here it comes. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and they cried out, for they all saw him and were in awe and terrorized at the same time. But immediately, now watch, he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. Who speaks like that? Who says in introduction, take heart, it is I, right? That is an odd way to greet people who are in awe and terrified at the same time. But that's what the Greek reads. Now, if you understand Greek, and you know there's a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the words, it is I, ego, eimi, are the exact same words that God uses when he reveals his name to Moses on Mount Sinai. In Exodus chapter 3, Moses is trying to get out of a job. Trust me. Attend my Bible class. You'll learn this. He tries 5 times to get out of the commission. And one of the arguments he'll make is, you know, I've been following sheep for the last 40 years, right? And you're going to send me back to Egypt. And in Egypt, they're going to ask me, well, who sent you? And I'm going to say, well, the God who appeared to me in the burning bush. And I say, well, what is his name? Because every god in the Egyptian pantheon had a name. And that name was associated with their particular powers. And at this point in time, most of the Hebrews had become assimilated into Egyptian culture. So we're going to need a name. And God said, tell them, ego, eimi. It is I, or I am who am. It's not a name, right? It's a revelation of absolute divinity, right? And so when Jesus, speaking to 12 Jewish men in a boat, says, take heart, he says, ego eimi, translated into Greek. He didn't speak Greek, but that's the way the words would be translated, which would take you right back to Exodus and the name that God revealed to Moses. Now, before you came to church this morning, you might not have known all of that. But the point is that Jesus is revealing his divinity time and time and time again. And you know what frustrated Rabbi Dr. David Flusser? Was that Jesus kept revealing his divinity time and time and time again. I mean, no Jewish person would do